After a fierce battle, the protagonist is captured by a group of savage dragon scavengers. And as they prepare to inflict cruel torture upon her, a huge dragon descends from the sky. Is it here to save her, or does it have some other unknown purpose? Join us to tame the wildest dragons. Let's get those subscriptions rolling, Chapter 23. I cursed the slippery volcanic sand on the way up the slope, but I thanked my lucky stars for it on the way down. It made gliding down to the base easier than surfing down an icy mountain in the heart of winter. After seeing how I skidded down the volcano, some of the dragon scavengers followed suit, leaning back as their hands behind them stirred them towards me. What they didn't anticipate was for me to chuck a piece of dragon vein at them when they got too close. The explosions shook the mountainside, making some of them lose their footing and tumble down. The men cried out on fire or limbs torn away from their body. At least 10 were already out of commission. As much as that should excite me, it also pissed them off and made them all the more eager to catch me. A whip struck out and caught my wrist. It jerked my arm back and stopped me in my tracks. Screaming, I ripped my sword out and cut the line before they got too close. I threw another piece of stone at them, then ran the rest of the way to the base. Before I knew it, I was running through the jungle, jumping over ferns and fallen logs. Their shouts were muffled by the broad green leaves between me and them, but I knew they hadn't stopped their chase.
I'd taken away their prize. They wouldn't let me get away with it.
I stumbled onto a gravel trail and slipped on the unexpected material on the ground. Flipping my hair over my shoulder, I saw a pair of horses and the ballistic cart sitting at the end of the trail, waiting to be ridden. This must be how they got around so quickly. Trail was nothing for horses. They could run along this path all night if their masters wanted them to. I could get away from these men faster. I'd never ridden a horse before, but assuming it was like riding a dragon, I freed their reins and swung up into the saddle, kicking it into a gallop. I nearly fell off the ride. Was so bumpy. Snapping my senses back into gear, I dug my heels in and clutched the horn of the saddle. She stole a horse. One of the scavengers called, leaping out of the jungle onto the trail. He thrust a finger in my direction. So that was going to help any of them in catching me. Soon more horses jumped into view and galloped after me. One of the men brandished a bow and arrow. Panicked. I kicked the horse to go faster. It wasn't quite like riding a dragon. It wasn't very fast, and there were no air currents for us to ride along to go faster. It was insanely infuriating when trying to escape a band of dragon scavengers. An arrow whistled past my head. Yelping, I ducked against the horse, grabbing hold of its mane. More arrows soared through the air, narrowly missing me. Luckily, the horse appeared to be used to being in battle and paid the arrows no mind. Not until one embedded itself into its hindquarters. The horse reared up and threw me off. The impact raked my back in pain, and a flash of white was all I could see for far too long of a time. Coughing on all the dust filling my lungs, I rolled to my feet and was met with a sword swinging my way.
I ducked and swept a leg underneath it.
While he was down, I sliced my blade across his throat, having no time to think about the blood staining my pants. Another scavenger came my way with a club. I dodged him and rammed my shoulder into his chest. He staggered back, but quickly fixed his stance and caught my hair. He yanked down hard. I fell to my knees, screaming. My eyes came level with his crotch. I rammed the hilt of my sword into it, kicked him back, then cut his hand off. He cried out, wailing his stump around. The others were swiftly approaching, but seemed to hesitate when they saw what I'd done to their comrades. I took that moment to dive into the forest. They couldn't shoot me with arrows, with all the broad leaves and trees in the way. My legs burned with every leap and bound over the flora in my way. My lungs screamed for me to stop and take a moment to breathe properly. Unfortunately for my body, it didn't quite understand how much trouble I'd be in if I slowed down for even a minute. The scavengers were hot on my tail, more pissed off than a ravenous dragon. However, my body appeared to have had enough. I stumbled on a route, and getting back up took more effort than it should have. 3 scavengers were on me in a heartbeat. 2 grabbed my arms, holding me still while the last one stood in front of me and clucked the side of my face. White flared in my vision, and then pain flared on the other side. Easy there, Pap, the man beside me, grunted while I tried to jerk free. Don't damage the face. I want something good to look at when I fuck her. Here I was hoping they would be too angry with me to want to rape me. I'd hoped for a quick death, but it looked like they were going to drag it out. Pat, a man with a mop of dark red hair, nodded to his accomplice in agreement.
Good idea, Grunt.
It's been a while since I fucked something pretty. He then proceeded to sucker punch me. Even though it would only make him more angry, I spat the blood, filling my mouth onto his face. He cried out, staggering back, but roaring as fiercely as any dragon. I stomped on Gronk's foot and shoved him away. The other one held me tighter against his chest, reaching for a knife. I threw my head back, his nose crunched against my skull. He wailed and dropped to the floor. I stole his knife and hucked it at Pat, catching him square in the chest. Gurgling, he slowly teetered to the ground into a pool of his own blood. I whirled around for Gronk, just in time to duck under his swing. Sword in hand, I spun around him and sliced into the back of his legs. While he was on his knees, I ripped my blade across his throat. The rustling of the jungle didn't give me the chance to breathe. Before they caught up to me again, I booked it for the cave hidden within the leaves, not too far from where I stood. It was dark. The only illumination was the sunlight glinting off the damp wall. The deeper I went, however, the less light came through, and then it was pitch black. I kept my hand on the wall and followed it by touch. I feared too much to light a torch in case the scavengers saw it in passing. The cool air was a relief on my skin after being hot for so long. I'd almost forgotten what it was like to be cold. As I traversed the cave, I stole big breaths to catch up on all the air I deprived of myself earlier. It was crisp in my lungs and a little dank. The further into the cave I went, the more rank it became. And then my foot landed in something hot and squishy. I didn't need to take a deep breath to know what I'd stepped in. Something lives in here, and it's still here, shit. My day couldn't get any worse, could it? Right on cue, I heard the dragon scavengers check the cave. I want that bitch found.
Yeah.
I looked up at the ceiling on the off chance someone upstairs was watching. You know how to make a girl work, don't you? Grumbling, I continued my path down the cave a little faster. The grunts of the scavengers weren't too far behind. Torches lit their way through the dark maze. At this rate, they were going to find me before I found the exit of there was one. No, don't be pessimistic now. There's a way out. There has to be. I was not going out being tortured and raped by dragon scavenger. Light revealed itself up ahead, sunlight. I rushed towards it, more confident in my steps with every passing minute. I was nearly running when I came across a large cavern. The sunlight came in through a massive hole in the ceiling. Vines and roots dangled inside, filling the otherwise bleak cave full of color. The hole wasn't what had stopped me in my tracks, though. There were at least 10 dragons curled around their nests or cuddling with their mates in the far corner. 10 pairs of eyes snapped in my direction, then their various snarls filled the cavern. I sucked in a breath. Being attacked by wild dragons for flying in their skies was one thing. Wandering into their den was a whole other thing. This was their home, where they bred, where they raised their young. No one was allowed to enter their den. There she is. I glanced over my shoulder. The scavengers were right behind me. An archer let the others run ahead while he pulled back the string of his back. The arrow sailed in the air, missing my head by an inch, and whistled past me, striking a dragon that had crept up behind me. The arrow wasn't strong enough to pierce its scales, but it was enough of a hindrance to piss him off. The dragon reared back and roared so loud it shook the cavern. There was no time to think. I darted past the dragon and ran for the vines dangling from the hole. A scavenger followed me, grabbing my shirt and yanking me back. before I could reach them. I screamed in frustration. He fisted the front of my shirt and lifted me up, then rammed me back into a stalagmite. His knife was colder than the air around us against my throat.
Gotcha.
His eyes raked me in slowly as if it was the first time he'd seen a woman.
Who knew? Maybe it was his teeth were rotten enough to keep any sane woman away from him.
Boss is gonna be real happy when he gets a good look at.
Don't think he'd mind much if I got first dibs. He ripped my shirt open and cupped my breast.
His mistake was sheathing his knife to do it.
I shoved him back and got into punches before he'd staggered too far away from me.
I stepped forward to show him what I thought of his grope fest. A dragon stepped between us and took rotten teeth wholly into his mouth. He tossed his head back and swallowed the male. The green dragon turned his head to me, and I thought I was next until I recognized him as the male I'd met in the forest. He regarded me a moment, seeming to also remember me. More scavengers cried out, and the dragon turned to help his fellow mates to dispatch the humans who dared to enter their den. I took that as a thank you for saving my mate and rushed for the vines, ignoring the screams filling the cavern. I just reached the top when someone grabbed what was left of my shirt and hauled me the rest of the way up. Before I could run away, a club came down on the back of my head. The world filled with darkness. I couldn't have been passed out for long. I was still by the hole leading to the dragon's den, only my hands had been tied behind my back, and 2 pairs of hands had my shoulders, pulling me off the ground. Groaning, I lifted my head to see at least 20 dragon scavengers surrounding me. They looked more pissed off than the last one. They were covered in sweat and dirt, some bore scratches their armor sliced through, while one man in particular held his bandaged stump, glaring vehemently at me.
Dread fills my chest.
The man with the eye patch and jagged scar stepped through the crowd and caught my chest. He bared his black teeth, a single golden nugget shimmering in all the round.
You've caused my men a lot of trouble, girl.
You're going to bring me my prize, or I'll let them have their way with you. I spat on his face.
I'd rather die. He couldn't have Zaya.
It was why I told him to take Camden once he was better and get out of here. I wasn't worth the life of a dragon. An evil smirk splayed across his face.
Oh, I'm sure you'll be begging for your end soon enough.
Maybe after a few of my men have taken out their frustration on you, you might change your mind on how precious that dragon is to you. He looked up at his men. Let's get away from the den and set up camp for the night. And then you can have your fun. The 2 men holding me dragged me after their leader like hell. I was going to make this easy on them. I caught roots with my feet, jerked on my shoulders whenever I could, and cursed them all to 7 hells. When we passed a tree, I rammed my captives into it. I wanted them to think twice about touching me tonight, because if they wanted to get their cocks near me, I was going to unleash a world of hurt on them first. It'd be better for their safety to just kill me now. Fuck boss. She dislocated my shoulder. The man on my right released me to hold his shoulder.
I yanked myself free of the other man and spun around, landing my heel into dislocated shoulder's jaw.
He flopped onto the ground. The men stood in stunned silence. I ran not very far. I tripped and face-planted into a pile of fern. With my hands tied behind my back, I felt like a turtle stuck on its shell. Hands seized me.
No.
Let me go. It was a cry of frustration. Why couldn't they just kill me? I would never give Zeller up, no matter what they did to me. My cries turned into hopeless sobs as they dragged me back to the group. I could be the biggest pain in the ass, but they wanted Zeller, and they would do whatever they could to get me to call on him. My last few hours or days were going to be the worst of my life, and there was nothing I could do to stop it, save give up my friend. I couldn't do that to him. The thought of them taking him apart piece by piece, selling his horns, bones, scales, and blood, all for what? Money? A roar filled the air above us. Birds flew out of their perches in the canopy. The whole force fell silent, for all but a moment. A dragon dropped from the sky, crushing half of the scavengers under its claw. I gaped as the massive beast swung its spiny tail, impaling several men on the 6 thick horns at the end. He snapped a man in half with his powerful jaws and tossed chunks of him at the other. The men holding me quaked in fear when he set his fierce golden eyes on them. Black smoke puffed out of his nostril. He released a roar fit for a king in our faces. The men dropped me in favor of taking arms. I didn't know where this dragon came from or why he was helping me, only that he was very efficient at killing the men who wanted to rape and torture me. So I put my 2 feet together and kicked the butt of the man closest to me. He staggered into the dragon's jaws, screaming until it was suddenly cut off. The other man cried in horror. He whirled around from me, sword swinging. "You bitch." Yelping, I rolled out of the way, and then he was flying into a tree head first. The dragon had swatted him away seamlessly as he approached me. I held my breath in case I'd been wrong about him wanting to help me. We might have just wandered into his territory and pissed him off. His muzzle brushed against my face softly, the rough, dark green, mistakenly black scales rubbing against my cheek. The pair of nostrils on either side of my face flared as they took in my scent. A purr started in his throat, vibrating out of his jowl. Surprised by the tenderness of his tone, I reached out, or at least tried to. My hands were still tied behind my back. Noticing my struggle, the dragon bumped my shoulder, flipping me over. I teetered, falling face first into the ground. I stiffened when I felt the dragon's teeth on my back. One nudged its way between the knots and tugged it apart. My arms sprang free, and I used them to climb to my hands and knees. I lifted my head in time to see more scavengers running for the dragon with rope and weapons. Boss cracked his whip. The leather tendril wrapped around my wrist and jerked me out from under the dragon. He dragged me to his feet. With a conniving, smug smile, he pulled me to a stand by my hair, a knife to my throat. His breath was unbearable up close. Thanks for my biggest prize yet. Now you may get your wish. I heard a solid click on the other side of the dragon. The ballista was lining up a shot for the dragon's heart. Never mind, the knife at my throat. I screamed for the dragon to turn around. The arrow pulled back. Zeller landed on top of it, crushing the weapon and the user with a powerful rule. The cool blade bit into my skin, reminding me that I was the only one in danger now. I squeezed my eyes shut, and the blade and boss were no longer there, but in the jowls of the dark green dragon. He shook the man trapped between his teeth violently, then tossed the remaining parts at the last few scavengers. They paled and ran. They were all gone in less than a minute, leaving me alone with 2 dragons. I patted myself down to reassure myself that I was still alive and had miraculously survived something. I was 100% sure there was no chance of surviving. Everything was in check. Not even any major injury. In disbelief, I turned to Zeller and wrapped my arms around his thick neck. You came back for me. And you brought a friend? I'd never been so grateful. A dragon ignored me in my life. The dragon tucked me in with his neck in the most dragon-like hug he could make. Well, Camden said behind me, 'cause friends as implies we're on good terms, which we are not. Surprised to hear his voice, I spun around. Camden stood a few feet away in all his 6'5" pure muscled glory. His arms were crossed, ashen hair, which appeared to have taken on a green tinge in the jungle, tousled into a complete mess atop his head. The fury in his green eyes cut into Zeller, but I could hardly feel the heat of his gaze because my eyes were on the utter nakedness of his body. Zeller snapped his teeth at him with a growl. Camden glared harder.
Oh, please, you would have left her. Loyal friend you are after everything she's done for you.
Zeller pawed at the ground, insulted by his accusation. I don't care if she told you to leave her. You ignore her and come back anyway, not wait until I make you help me find her. I blinked as the two bickered. Now I'd seen everything. Camden was talking to a dragon, like I would. And then I noticed the dragon who had saved my life wasn't here anymore, and the last time I saw Cam, he was being taken into the heart of a volcano. Damn, how did you get here? Where are your clothes? He stopped arguing with Zeller to look at me. The hard edge in his eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then he seemed to realize that
I could see his members swaying as he moved and stood a little straighter, a mischievous twinkle in his eye.
Lava has a tendency to burn everything it touches, including clothes. And I flew here. Did you ride with Zeller? And even if he had ridden here, his legs would have been chafed to bits, which I could confidently verify they were not. In fact, they were as fine as a cool glass of water on a hot summer's day. A cocky smile sprouted on Camden's face. No, I used my wings. He stepped back, flesh trembling. And then his body began to change. His skin thickened, dark green scales running over his flesh. The green of his eyes fluttered to gold with vertical slits, dividing them down the middle. Then it all happened so fast he grew, neck elongating, a tail sprouting from his spine, wings unfurling from his back, face extending into a snout. In less than a minute, he transformed into the dark green dragon that saved my life. All I could do was gape in awe. You can turn into a dragon. It seemed impossible as I spoke, but I'd literally just watched him transform. There was no denying it. Is this normal? Like, can your brothers do this too? Had my brothers left out a very important part of guiding a dragon prince as some big joke? Camden transformed back into his normal human self, flexing his arms and back as if he'd just finished a workout. No, they can't. They're going to be pissed, he said rather smugly. When I said I'd help him find a powerful bond with a dragon, I didn't have this in mind. This was a million times better. Do you feel any different? I asked, intrigued. He grinned at my enthusiasm. Loads, but in the best of way. Apparently my eyesight was abysmal because now I can see the faintest of details in everything. The world feels so much bigger now that I can see clearly. I smell. His nose fluttered and he frowned. I'm not sure what I smell. There are so many scents, but there's one I know: lavender.
Yeah.
His eyes went inhumanly black in an instant. He stepped towards me, possibly with more grace than he'd ever moved before his transformation. Ziller sat beside me, coiling his tail around me, purposely putting 3 feet between Cam and I. Cam might have saved my life, but the sharpness in the dragon's eyes suggested he didn't trust the new Camden with me. He snorted and bounced his head up and down in a threatening display. Cam glared at him, clearly wanting to argue, but then he gave in with a sigh and took a small step back. Fine, you're right anyway. He looked down at his hands, smooth and untainted by the scars he once bore. I can feel him trying to influence me. What? All my curiosity was suddenly replaced with concern. He only had sad eyes for me. Zeller doesn't want me near you until I have a better grip on the dragon inside me. He thinks I might hurt you. Doubtful I crossed my arm. That was an excuse to not go near me, if I ever heard one. He could just say he'd rather be anywhere but near me instead of using his new transformation to get out of it. So not only can you speak to and understand dragons, you have one inside you too. Yes, he said matter-of-factly. He gives me strength like you wouldn't believe. He taught me how to shift back to this form so I can talk to you. He taught me how to follow your scent. I found you in this ridiculously enormous jungle because of it. But he is an animal and has animal instincts, which he's convinced I should act on. Like what flat gold eyes flaring, he inched towards me. They burned like 1,000 suns when they landed on the large tear in my shirt, amongst other things. Moistening his lips, he took another step. His hands trembled at his sides like he was fighting the urge fighting his dragon, I guess, to move them. Zealer growled, a warning to Cam, guiding me to his side with his tail. Camden shut his eyes and massaged his temples. Quieten up right now, Cam. I stepped out of Zeller's grasp and touched his arm out of concern. He was muttering and sneering, but it wasn't directed at me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Cam. As soon as my hand came into contact with his hot skin, his eyes flew open. Abruptly, he seized my arms with a fierce grip that scared a scream out of me. The dragon scavengers had handled me so roughly. I never expected him to be so violent, especially not towards me, even after I nearly got him killed. Despite how I felt about him and everything we'd overcome in this moment, I feared him. He cried, squeezing his eyes closed as if to shut out everything around him. I didn't know if he was talking to me or his dragon. He shook, vigorously releasing me as he staggered back. Stay away from me. Clyde, don't touch me. I backed up to Zeller's side, feeling as though he'd struck me with his new strength. Sorry, I murmured. I didn't want his words to hurt me. I didn't want to feel distraught or rejected all along. I knew this was how he was going to react. Amber had said he didn't want to see me, and I didn't blame him. Yet I'd still somehow convinced myself he wouldn't hate me. He turned away from us, taking deep breaths, still muttering away.
I assumed he was talking to his dragon, however that worked.
Meanwhile, Zeller watched him like a hawk claws dug into the earth, ready to pounce in a second's notice. I peered up at the faded sun nervously. Hey, kid! I know I've asked a lot of you these past few days, but we should probably get going. Make a camp!
Yeah.
We'll be safe in the trees. No, he cut me off. He faced me panting, doing everything in his power to not look me in the. It's time to go home. I didn't like the idea of spending the night alone with him either. Not when all I wanted right now was to be alone and ride the pain out. But we didn't have many options. It's almost dark. Do I need to remind you how dangerous it is to fly at night? You'll be safe, he promised, calmly confident in his new ability. The sooner we head back, the better, fine. If you want to go home that badly, let's go. At this point, did it really matter if we were attacked? At least the pain would stop. Zeller watched me as I climbed into the saddle with sad eyes. It was like he knew how dejected I felt. When I looked over to Camden, there was a pain in his eyes I didn't understand. There was no reason for him to hurt. I wasn't the one who treated him like a disgusting bug. But ignoring him, I slipped into my jacket, thankful to have some cover from the chilly night ahead of us, and leaned forward for the handle. All right, Zeller, let's go home. Chapter 24. Plum came into view an hour after the sun peeked over the mountain. We managed to fly much faster. Now the Camden's enormous weight didn't slow Zeller down. Not a single creature dared to interrupt our flight all night. I peered up at the dragon flying above us, worried how people would take his transformation. It was unheard of, foreign for someone to turn into a dragon. Would people outcast him out of fear, even if he was one of the most beautiful dragons I'd ever seen? He didn't have the same rugged exterior other dragons had. His scales were in neat, silky lines, not haggard. The leather of his wings seemed softer, not as hard and crackly as Zeller said. We landed in my backyard. My family rushed out to greet me, ignoring the extra dragon I had brought back. Dad plucked me out of the saddle before I could think about dismounting and pulled me into a tight hug. You're okay, he breathed more, so telling himself than asking me if I was all right, because if he hadn't been so relieved to see me, he would have seen all the bruises and scrapes and torn open shirt. Where's Camden? Haddon asked, peering up at the empty saddle. Giles eyed the new dragon cautiously to think she found a substitute. Wriggling out of Dad's arms, I gave my brother a push, then turned to Casper, who had the closest build to camp. Can you go grab a pair of pants? Don't look at me like that. Just do it. He stuck his tongue out at me, then came back with some pants. Following Cam's request to stay away from him, I only took a few steps before leaving the pants on the ground some feet away from him. In a swift motion of flexing muscles and bending bones, he stood on 2 feet as Prince Camden Akron. Naked, Callie, Dad barked, turn around, don't look at the van's junk. I'm not looking. Except I tried not to, but it wasn't my fault. He was interesting to look at. To appease my father, I turned around to face my gaping brother. Giles was the first to react, throwing his hands in the air.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's just the coolest shit I've ever seen. Casper furrowed his brow at the prince. Camden shrugged, coming to my side. I shifted away from him, doing my part to keep a good distance, though he could at least make it a little easier and not stand so close. I'll explain it while Collie gets looked at by a healer. We ran into dragon scavengers over there. She saved my life. He offered the sort of smile that would have melted my heart if his eyes didn't look so sad. Why did he look so sad? What did he care for a few scratches? I'm fine, I said, jerking my eyes away. I'll get looked at later. Now works for me. Dad rebuked, giving me a hard look. Amelia's inside Giles added with a smile. Come on, if you're really fine, it won't take long. Grumbling, I followed them into the house. A smile sprang on Amelia's lips when she saw me. She took me upstairs while Camden told my brothers what happened. She blathered on about how happy she was to see me, how brave she thought I was to take Camden to the Dragon Lands by myself. She said that Amber had told everyone I'd completely lost it, afraid for the man I was hopelessly in love with, and I went and got him killed. Well, she wasn't wrong about one thing. I was hopelessly in love with the wrong man. It wasn't fair. Why did he have to be a prince who lived on the other side of the continent? Why did he have to end up having a part of the creature I held so dearly to my heart? Couldn't he just be a nobody villager like me, be someone who might possibly return the feelings I had? I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep while Amelia healed me until she shook me awake gently. She smiled at me, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Dinner's ready, dinner. Had I slept all day? The moon peering into my window suggested I had. Groggily, I followed her downstairs. Everyone but Cadden was at the table. He was in the kitchen making the final touches on dinner. I sat between Talon and Casper on the opposite end of the table from Camden. He'd cleaned up while I was sleeping, his hair shiny, a speck of silver glistening, and the thick strands that hadn't been there before. Must be part of his transformation. It definitely made him inhumanly handsome, more mystical and exotic. His clothes barely fit him, clinging on to him with everything they had as his new bulging muscles threatened to tear them apart. The features on his face seemed sharper somehow, though he still looked the same to me. How are you feeling, Cal? Harry asked, tapping my foot under the table with a cheeky grin. Dear gods, had he caught me staring? Embarrassed, I kept my head down while Cudden brought out the food. Couldn't a girl check out her apprentice's new hot body without judgment? Feeling lazy for sleeping all day, why didn't anyone wake me? Dad smiled sympathetically. We tried to, but you seemed like you really needed the rest. After what Camden told us, I'm surprised you didn't sleep longer. Do you feel rested enough to leave tomorrow? Giles asked, munching on his potatoes. Tomorrow. Leave for what? Camden's going home. Of course, he said simply. You have to drop him off so they don't think he ran away from you.
Oh.
After how the prince had acted when we left Acker Castle, it was likely they'd think he ran away as soon as he had the chance. Still, that didn't stop the overwhelming disappointment filling my chest.
You knew this would happen. It's time for you to say goodbye to him and get on with your life.
He'll move on and forget about you. Yeah, I guess we can leave tomorrow. I responded thickly. I didn't have the heart to look at anyone. The scar on my hand that bound me to my oath to guide Camden was gone without a trace. My part had been fulfilled. Now it was time for the prince to leave and fulfill his end of the oath, protect the people of his kingdom. My brothers and Camden talked about all the possibilities of the prince's new abilities and how he was going to use them while he fought with his brother. They all seemed excited for him to leave, explore the world with fresh eyes. All I could do was nod and agree numbly. I should be excited for him too. I was the first woman to guide a prince through the rite of passage, and he was the first in his family to transform rather than bond with a dragon. Camden had declared himself a shifter. He thought it sounded much cooler than Transformer, which Giles had called him. Camden was going to do great things, save many lives, and enjoy all kinds of adventures with his brothers, while I went back to training the dragonling. It was one of the most important jobs in the village, training the future generation of dragons. But after everything I'd done with Camden, it paled in comparison.
At some point, I couldn't stand the thoughts in my head, and I excused myself from dinner, saying I was still tired from our trip.
They let me go easily enough, their booming laughter loud enough to hear from my bedroom. I didn't get the chance to dwell too much on anything. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I passed out. We woke up early, just as the sun began to cast its light over Plum. I grabbed a fresh loaf of bread from Sammy's cart, broke it in half, and tossed the other piece to Camden. He frowned, inspecting it like it was a bowl of worms instead of breath. He wore only loose pants as we walked through the town to meet Elizor. Not a single goosebump revealed itself on his skin. On this chilly morning, I remained cozy in my jacket and riding pants, appreciating that the leather skirt hanging at knee length behind me didn't get in my way. Camden handed the piece of bread back to me. It appears I've adopted a more carnivorous appetite. Do you want some jerky I offer?
The jerky stall was coming up after my dreamless sleep last night. I woke up in a better mood.
Just as I decided when these feelings first started to develop, it was better for everyone if I ignored them and acted as if everything was okay. He laughed, shaking his head at me. I'm not a dragon all the time. Yeah, but I bet your dragon wants jerky.
I've yet met a dragon that could resist dried sheep spiced with a hint of pepper.
He bit his lip down. His eyes flashed gold, a sign I'd learned meant his dragon wanted out or was trying to influence him in some way. Jerky it is. We stopped by the butcher's and cleaned him out of the batch of jerky he'd prepared for today at Camden's dragon's insistence. It didn't go to waste. As soon as we left the store, he started chowing down on it. He hummed with closed eyes, a red hue filling his cheeks. I can't believe I'm eating dragon food. Snorting, I stole a chunk from him and nibbled on it. It's not. Chester makes the jerky for the people of Plum only. I give jerky to dragon. Even if you were. So what? You're part dragon, Cam. Embrace that scaly skin of yours. I'd never leave the sky if I was as lucky as you are. Man, if I thought I was envious of the Acker line for being able to talk to their dragons and share a soul with them, it was nothing compared to the envy I felt for Camdy and being able to shift into a dragon. What would I give to fly in the sky beside Elizur instead of on her to communicate with her and all of my dragons? You really don't think any differently of me, the prince asked almost shyly. I didn't know why, of all people, he would care how I thought of him. You're much cooler now. If I had known you were so short-tempered because you had a dragon rolling around inside of you, I might have been more lenient towards you. And not knee my balls. Let's not go that far. You had it coming, dragon or not. A smile tugged at the end of his lips, but he kept his eyes forward. They were on the healing hut. We passed the hut, but his eyes stayed on it, and his grip tightened on the bag of jerky. I stopped walking, ignoring the stone in my stomach. If you want to say goodbye to anyone in there, you can. He turned to me, surprised. I'd noticed him looking at it. His eyes were gold and slitting. It was kind of hard to ignore him practically itching to go inside. Amber and Cadence were probably inside, and they treated him far more fairly. Had been a lot friendlier to him than I had. I didn't blame him for wanting to say goodbye to them. I'm sure they wanted to give him a goodbye. He'd never forget. He swallowed.
No, I'm fine.
He sounded strained. There's no one in there I want to see. Are you sure? I asked doubtfully. Your dragon says otherwise. With a sigh that sounded a lot more like a grunt, he kept walking for the meadow. I had to readjust the saddle in my arms to hurry after his long stride. My backpack bounced against my shoulder blades as I went. My dragon smells the females in the huts. That's all. He relented once I caught up to him. He'd said his dragon made him think more primally. Females equaled passing on his gene. That was as primal as it got. Except, when he looked at me, a female, his dragon clearly didn't try to convince him to pass on his genes with me. Thanks, dragon, I sighed, unable to help myself. Well, is there anyone else you want to say goodbye to? No, was all he said before tearing into a piece of jerky. Elizur was already in the meadow, waiting for us. She hopped over to me, brushing her muzzle in my chest. I stroked along her jaw, glad I could take her to Hystera with me this time. She would love the ocean as much I did. Are you ready to go? She nodded enthusiastically, fluttering her wings. Okay, calm down, or I can't get the saddle on. She lay down, body abuzz, eager to take to the skies with me once again. At least when the prince was gone, one thing would never change my relationship with Alice. Camden stepped aside, striping out of his pants and handing them to me to put in his backpack. Until this whole thing happened to me, I never understood why the dragons here obeyed you and protected you. I get it now. You're one of them. They look up to you. You're their queen. He smiled at the idea.
I couldn't stop the flush, so I kept myself busy finishing up the buckles on the saddle so he couldn't see it.
Oh, I don't know about being their queen. They're my family. I do anything for them.
But that's why they do anything for you. They know you'd do the same.
He stepped back again and shifted, stretching his wings to their full expanse. Elisir jumped back, a shudder of hackles coming alive on her scales before she sniffed him and relaxed, recognizing him as Camden. She peered to me then to the dark green dragon wings flattening on her back, suddenly sat. I'm not riding on him. You're the one with the saddle on, aren't you? Don't get jealous. No one can replace you. Neelix. She perked up and angled around so I could swing onto her back. With all our stuff secured tightly in the saddle, Elisir spread her wings and leapt into the sky. The flight to Estera was even better with my best friend. She dove for every river we flew over and skimmed her claws across the surface. Then she broke away and twirled in the air. She danced around Camden, who was still getting the hang of flying in a straight line, teasing him with her tail in his face. He playfully nipped at the end, and she'd squeak, dropping low underneath him. When we entered the beautiful city of Estero, the sun glistened brightly on the ocean. Elisir was so entranced by its beauty, she nearly forgot we had to land at the castle, flying straight for the sparkly, endless blue. However, she was stopped by Camden's uncles. Who goes there? Lord Maverick. Demanded hopefully this was Lord Maverick. They look the same with their helmets on. It's me again. Kaladi Dracino, I added dryly when they said nothing. Where's Prince Camden? Lord Tyler asked, eyes slicing into his nephew's dragon form, having no idea it was him. He's here. I told him, trying to be patient. You'd think after the last time Prince Ellie told him off for disrespecting me, he'd learn. If you'd let us land, I can explain. Camden growled when Lord Maverick sneered at me. His dragon, however, jumped and looked back at her rider. His face screwed up in confusion and narrowed his eyes on Camden. It seems you have a lot to explain. They glided down to the gravelly landing pad. Eleazar landed near the edge of the cliff, claws poised to take off if the lords kept up with their attitude. I patted her neck as I slid off her back. It's okay. Nevertheless, she bared her teeth at the lords as they approached me. Ignoring them, I went into Camden's backpack and grabbed a shirt and pants. As much as I appreciated the view, it wasn't very princely for him to roam the castle with only pants on. He shifted back to his human form, taking his clothes gratefully from him. His uncles staggered back, despite their dragons telling them that the green dragon they'd seen was in fact their nephew. What did she do to you, Cam? Lord Tyler asked, breathless. He looked at me like I was a witch. Don't give her that look. Uncle Cam snapped, surprisingly angry at his uncle. She made me the strongest dragon prince the Ecker line has yet to see, as promised by her father, and if you disrespect her one more time, I'll have you removed from court faster than you can blink. Come on, Kalai, let's go find my more welcoming family member. He didn't give me a choice when he grabbed my arm and tugged me inside. Servants rushed to greet him, forcing him to slow his pace and release me. They asked him all kinds of questions about his stay and his dragon. They laughed when he said he'd talk about his dragon later. By God, they lapped everything he said up. The adoration in both the men and men who served him was so evident and made him smile. He happily answered their questions, following them as they guided him to clean him up. Just like that, I was forgotten in the hallway, left to stare after them. I knew it'd happen, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly. 1 minute Camden was yelling at his uncle for disrespecting me, and then, in the next, his adoring servant swept him off his feet without a single glance in my direction. It hurt more than I thought it would.
Well, I guess I've done my job.
There was still enough time to make it back home before the sun fully set, as long as Elisir didn't play around. The sooner I got home and moved on, the better. For him, for me, for my heart. Swallowing, I turned back for the door, but tiny Jessie was there, smiling at me. News of your arrival? Travel fast? How was the rite of passage? He didn't give you too much trouble, did he? I think it would have been better if Talon had trained him after all, I replied honestly. If Talon had trained him, I wouldn't have spent so much time with Camp. I would have gone through my days happily training my dragonlings, never knowing how brave and kind the prince really was. I would have never found out how loyal and honest he was. I would have never fallen in love with the last person in this world who would love me. Jesse winced. Ooh, that bad, eh?
Well, you didn't just take it lying down, did you?
No, of course not. I tried really hard not to love him, but it happened anyway. I tame dragons for a living. I can handle a prince. She beamed. I can't wait to hear all about it, the ball. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. I froze. What chapter 25? Happy Halloween, everyone. If you're going out tonight, have fun and stay safe, ball. I asked, standing in the middle of the empty hallway in dumbfounded shock. She couldn't be serious. This wasn't the end. I couldn't just go home. Jessie seemed to only glow brighter the more we talked about this supposed ball. Of course, silly.
No one told you. No, I had 5 little shits to kill when I got home.
How could they have not told me there was a ball? Do I have to be there? Like, isn't it just to congratulate the prince for finding a dragon or his inner dragon? She peered back at me sympathetically. He wouldn't have found his partner without you. We're celebrating both of your successes. Wonderful. There's no way I can convince you to let me sneak out now, is there? If I leave now, I can get to Plum before dark. She pulled me closer to her side, wrapping her arms tight around one of mine. I couldn't tell if it was out of excitement or if she thought this would stop me from running away. You're kidding. I get to dress you up again. It was so much fun last time. Besides, you're great company. What if I told you I didn't have a dress? There was no chance I'd be allowed to wear what I had onto a ball. Was there? The skip in her step only faltered for a moment before it regained its momentum, cheerier than ever. Leave that up to me. We came to a stop in front of the room I'd stayed in last time. She opened it up for me. My things were already laying over the bed I had mud. I'd been expecting to stay the night and leave at first light at the most. I'd been excited to see how quickly we'd gotten here, how quickly I could go home and put all this behind me. Jessie guided me to the bathroom, suggesting I spend my sweet time in the bath, Aka. I unsurprisingly real. Aside from the light sponge bath Amelia had given me while she healed my scratches and bruises, I hadn't bathed properly in days. I probably still had traces of Camden's sweat on me. She left me to clean myself up. By the time I was done in the bath, she had returned, knocking on the door. I answered in a bathrobe, and then I instantly wished I had more on to hide my scars. I curtsied. Your Majesty. Queen Bethany took in my scar-ridden legs with steely eyes before gracefully entering my room. She smiled at me as she sat on the divan at the end of the bed. Good afternoon. Several servants stormed my room, holding all kinds of gowns off the ground. My eye caught a deep blue one, but I cleared my throat nervously and returned the queen's smile. What can I do for you, your highness? Though it was quite clear why she was here. Jessie told me you came unprepared for the ball tonight. That's an understatement if I ever heard one. Yes, I did. My brothers thought it'd be funny if they didn't explain what happened after Prince Camden's rite of passage. She did something very unqueenly and rolled her eye. Boys can be such a pain sometimes. Don't you agree? Most of the time, your highness? She laughed. I like you, Calais. You speak your mind. Now I've come with dresses. You may pick one to wear tonight. I will have it tailored to fit you before the ball starts. Without thinking about whether it was fashionably sensible or if this was from the queen's wardrobe or not, I pointed at the blue one that first caught my attention. Yeah. It was a nice color if I was going to wear it for a night. That's all that mattered. Let's go with that one. Queen Bethany clapped her hands twice, all the servants, but the one holding the blue gown left promptly. Jessie bumped my shoulder with a wink. Good choice. The seamstress came in and took my measurement. It didn't take her long at all. Then she was gone with the dress, too. The queen stood up. I will leave you to get ready for the ball. She stopped in the doorway and peered back at me. Her expression open to worry.
Camden told me what happened to him and what you did to ensure he stayed safe and got better.
Thank you for looking after my son, Kalai. It will not be forgotten. Oh, I wouldn't make any promises. I thought, but all I said was, I was just doing my job, Your Highness. She left, but I had a sense she knew that I was lying.
Jessie squealed in absolute delight once the dress was buttoned up and she saw me in the mirror.
She clapped her hands excitedly, gushing over the deep color on my skin.
She loved how the strapless sweetheart corset framed my bust, not that it needed much help, and how the layered skirts billowed around me like blue ink.
Personally, I liked the fabric. It was matte, not shimmery, like some of the dresses I could have picked. It was thick too, durable, and it looked bloody fantastic on my body. Jessie ensured my eyes popped with silver and blue eyeshadow and gave me a dark red lipstick to match my tan. My dark brown hair was brushed and tamed, it already being curly enough to need nothing done to it.
Jessie finished the look with a white diamond necklace and matching bracelet. I couldn't believe it was me in the mirror, not some foreign princess visiting the actor.
Are you sure this isn't too much? I asked Jessie. She told me countless times that this was plain compared to what some people would wear tonight, but it still felt a bit much to me. Maybe it was all the sparkly diamonds. You'll be fine. Are you ready? No, but I have to go. Don't I? How long do I have to stay before it's a respectful time to leave? She sighed, lifting the skirts up as I stepped down from the stool. At least she let me wear my boots. The skirts were so long, no one would ever notice, and I was tall enough without heels for anyone to question it. You'll have too much fun to be looking at the time, but 3 hours. 3 hours?
Maybe someone will raid the party, and it'll have to be cut short, and I can beat the shit out of someone to take my anger out on instead of Jessie.
I heard that she sassed, opening the doors for me. Use your inside voice next time. Just relax. Cly, have fun, dance with handsome men, eat to your heart's content. She trailed off, knowing she didn't need to say more after the mention of food.
She knows how to play your stomach. I stole a deep breath then, followed her out into the hallway.
It's just a party. Don't think about it as saying goodbye to camp. Get drunk, eat food, ogle young men, leave in the morning. I can do this. I told myself. Oh, of course you can. Jessie said, matter of fact, they stopped fussing.
The guards opened the door to the ballroom, and she pushed me in, ordering the guards to shut the door quickly so I couldn't escape.
To save myself for acting like a fool and knocking the door down like I wanted to, I clenched my fists at my sides and turned to face the ballroom packed with people. They wore gaudy dresses and uptight hairstyles that appeared the higher the hair, the better. The hair, sure?
Yeah.
We wanted birds to nest in there. The men were at least a little more sensible in their attire, but they made up for it with their lewd gazes and roaming hands. Apparently they were too handsome to deny if you liked old and creepy. No one noticed my entrance. Thank the gods. They were all too busy chatting or dancing. The room was lined with tables and chairs while the center was free to use as a dance floor. My eyes instantly went to the buffet table on the other side of the room from there. My stomach rumbled. It was what I needed to snap me out of my stupor. Eyes on the delicious, juicy roast basically calling me over. I skirted around the edge of the room, keeping to myself. However, now that I was moving, I appeared to have attracted those old creepy men. One cornered me and bowed gallantly, clearly mistaking me for someone in this court. I doubt any man would look at me like that if he knew I tamed dragons for a living. His blue eyes took me in way too slowly to be appropriate at any time, unless it was in the bedroom. What's your name? Sweetheart. I don't believe I've had the pleasure in meeting you before. Kyle was all I gave him. I wanted my roast beef, damn it.
His left eye twitched, but the smile remained. Kyle Dracino, if you really wanted to know.
I've never heard of you. He seemed less interested now that I didn't have a court name. What were your parents thinking when they gave you a boy's name? I crossed my arms with a glower that made most dragons bow in submission. And what's your name?
He swallowed, pulling on his collar for more air. Meredith Winslow. Meredith.
And he mocked me for having a boy's name. I knew a married one.
She was eaten by a flock of harpies. She wasn't very bright and left the town boundaries after dark. A beat of silence.
Oh, let's.
He pointed at no one in particular as Charles. I haven't seen him in forever.
You must forgive me. I have to go see him. And you can tell all your friends about me.
I flashed him an evil smile. Maybe I would have fun tonight terrorizing Randy Oldman.
A soft chuckle sounded behind me. I spun around expecting Cal, other than him and wife. Should I have expected it? He was significantly younger than the last man I talked to and more attractive with black hair and smoldering brown eyes.
He offered a gentle smile and winked. You're merciless and exactly how Cam described you. Who are you, Ronan Earlson? At your service, Mystery Shino. He bowed a hand on his heart. I relaxed. Oh, you're Cam's friend? He smiled pleasantly. You heard about me.
He talked about you a lot.
I'd take him to mountaintops, and he'd point to all the villages. You two would have fun. He shook his head. A lady wouldn't call what Cam and I did fun. I stuck my chin up at him. Apparently, Camden hadn't described me well enough if Ronan thought I was a lady. Hunting monsters is fun to me. His smile grew like he'd been expecting that response. Yes, Camp made no exaggerations about you. Would you care to dance? I don't know how to. I made no pretense about being ashamed I couldn't do such a ridiculous thing.
Why would you even want to dance with me?
Cam's friend, or not most men, would have run for the hills from me. He blinked, apparently taken aback I'd asked such a question. Why, Kale?
You're very beautiful, and Cam asked me to keep you out of trouble until he arrived, and I can see no better way to enjoy keeping you out of trouble than to dance with you.
As for your lack of qualifications, I'm an excellent lead. Tonight, you'll dance as if you've been doing it all you like. His words were very smooth, but there was only one thing he said that I paid any attention to. Cam asked you to keep an eye on me?
Hey, I thought he'd already forgotten me as soon as he walked off with the servant.
His eyes softened, the smile on his lips, sympathetic. Moistening his lips, he nodded over to the dance floor. Come on, I only have so much patience, and Cam promised me you were faster on your feet than this. I'm the fastest proven. As it turned out, it was harder to prove how fast I was when I had to follow Roman's lead and we were dancing to a slow song. Aside from that, though, Ronan wasn't bad company and dancing wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. We swept across the floor, smoothly and elegantly, like we'd been dancing our whole lives as he promised. Several girls approached us between songs and tried to dance with him, but he always rejected them with far more grace than I would reject anyone. I saw in his eyes how much he'd rather be dancing with someone else, though. He kept his hands respectfully on my back, but his eyes roamed a lady or two as we passed by, looking as hungry as I felt. At some point, my stomach couldn't take it any longer. I stepped away from him. I'm going to get some food. I'll come with you. He responded instantly, dutifully. I shook my head and pointed at one of the girls who'd been eyeing him for the last hour. Go dance with her. I promise I won't burn the castle down. I'll be right there. I gestured to the roast beef, which had now diminished to half of its size. He looked torn, glancing between me and the beautiful girl twirling her tawny hair at it. Are you sure you've endured me long enough? Go have some fun, Ronan. If you get bored, you know where to find me. He bowed, kissing my knuckle. You are a treasure sent from heaven, Kalai. Yeah, don't ever let Camden forget it. Sure. Anything to get him to stop saying things like that. He didn't even mean them. He was just being nice to me because Cam had asked him. He left to dance with the girl, and I filled my plate with beef and potato. Table set conveniently empty in the far corner of the room, hidden by the buffet. I enjoyed my food, memorizing all the flavors, exploding in my mouth so I could give Calvin a somewhat accurate recipe when I got home. The entrance to the ballroom opened, the music paused, and everyone stopped mid-conversation. A servant stepped into the room, first announcing the Acker family. The king and queen strolled in, pouring the ochre colors red, gold, and black.
I felt better about my dress after seeing the extravagance of the queen's gold and red silks float around her seamlessly as she strode beside her husband.
Crown bejeweled, with black diamonds sparkling upon her head. The king looked equally fantastic in his billowing red cape and black and gold suits. In fact, all the princes wore black and gold suits. Only Prince Ellie wore gold lapels, while the rest was black, and Prince Quentin wore an entirely gold suit with a black dress shirt underneath. Prince Liam's suit was black with gold trimmings, and Prince Alaric wore a black suit with a gold vest. Prince Camden wore the only suit with a pattern on it. It was black with a golden dragon stretched across the front in a series of swirls and hurls. He was heart-stopping, but that wasn't why my stomach hit the floor. He'd brought a date all the princess had, and she was absolutely gorgeous and loving every minute being on his arm. It was never going to be you. I knew that, but it still stung to see him with someone else. It had when he was with Amber and Cadence. It didn't change with this woman. Having lost my appetite, I pushed my plate away. A servant quickly swept in and took it away. The night had gotten a whole lot worse than I imagined it could ever get. It was one thing to drag out our goodbye over an entire night. Now I had to watch some floozy giggle at everything he said. The royal family made their way to the biggest table on the opposite end of the room from me. It made it difficult to see him over the sea of bodies. King Corona remained standing and made some big speech about his son's success in the Randala territory. He embellished it and made it sound like Camden had gone on a daring quest, one where his life could have tragically ended at any moment, and he'd fought valiantly against many monsters before finding his partner. Except, unlike his brothers, he discovered that his partner was within himself. That stirred the crowd. No one knew what that meant, so the king told Camden to make a demonstration. The prince strolled over to the wide balcony doors of which servants opened for him. Right in front of all the curious eyes of his court, he shifted into his dragon. One woman's scream hovered over the various gasps that filled the room. His golden eyes scanned the crowd vigilantly for their reaction. Once he didn't attack anyone, it appeared to be what everyone was waiting for. He fluttered his wings for show and curled up on the balcony for people to greet him and investigate his scales up close. King Corona went on with his speech, saying that none of Camden's achievements could have been made possible without me, which I doubted. Talion would have guided him just fine. Rodin appeared at my side, tugging me to a stand. I jerked my arm free, remaining seated. Leave me alone, Ronan. King Corona has requested your presence. Stand, I greet. Now it was my turn to be paraded. Grumbling, I stood up, so everyone knew it was me who had transformed Camden into the magnificent dragon they drooled over. Ronan pulled me to the balcony while everyone applauded and congratulated me. He had to shove me to stand next to Camden's curled up form. His tail crept out from under his legs and circled around my feet, slowly corralling me next to his enormous head. His golden eyes were on me, ignoring everyone else petting it. I can't believe you're letting these people touch you, I muttered to him. I would have eaten them all by now. A couple standing near me looked at me in horror, then slowly backed away with a quick apology aimed at their dragon prince. A chuckle rumbled in the dragon's chest. He grunted and pointed with his eyes at the silver circle in the floor as if to say, that's why I'm the prince and you are not. I picked it up and hooked it on a smaller horn near the end of his snout. You're going to need a bigger crown. His whole body vibrated, and he leaned his head into my side, rubbing up and down the length of my body. Hey, buddy, don't ruin the dress. It's not mine. He paused, eyes twinkling, then did the unthinkable and bit into my skirt and tore the bottom. I squeaked, your mom is going to have me executed. She has the power to do that. You know, he slipped more of the skirt in between his teeth and watched me carefully. Rip it again, and I can easily turn into a dragon slayer. His teeth slowly closed around the fabric, still watching me, daring me to do something about it. I mean, I slapped one of his horns warningly. Cam, the girl he'd entered the ballroom with, shimmied through the crowd, and stopped in front of his colossal head. Standing this close, she didn't look as gorgeous as she had when I saw her across the room. Her dark blonde hair was curled like a poodle's face caked with makeup. She completely ignored me, cupping his muzzle with both hands. You're amazing. I knew you were big, but now you're big. I can't wait to see what else has changed. She winked at him in an attempt to be coy, but we all knew what she was talking about. Deciding I should leave now before I kicked her teeth in, I patted the top of Camden's head. I'm going to call it a night. I have an early flight. I enjoyed working with you, Prince. Goodbye. It wasn't exactly the goodbye I'd aimed for, but there were far too many people around for me to hug him, and his floozy clearly wanted him to shift back so she could get a sneak peek of what was to come. His tail tightened around my feet, nearly tripping me, but I jumped over it easily enough with my boots and headed inside. Suddenly, it sounded like a roll of fabrics was being torn apart behind me, and everyone gasped or screamed. I didn't need to look over my shoulder to know Camden had just shifted back to his human form.
Kawaii shit. People stopped him blatantly reminding him he had no clothes on. Ronan.
It wasn't Ronan who hooked his arm around mine, though. Prince Alaric pulled me to the side before I could go to the door.
My brother's talking to you, Kawaii. I don't care. Let me go, Alaric, please.
I couldn't look up at him. He'd know I was about to cry. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. All I wanted was to drop Camden off, hug him, goodbye, and leave so I could deal with my pain at home. No, this family insisted on stretching it out as long as possible, made me wear this ridiculous dress, and flaunted that stupid woman in front of her. All for what? Tradition. Fuck tradition. It must have been my tone, because Alaric released me and stepped back. He waved off his other brothers before they got too close. His eyes swept over me with pity. I'm sorry, he whispered, for whatever he did to you. He didn't do anything. I was the stupid one. It was my fault. I couldn't stop myself from falling in love with him. Swallowing back the tears, I slipped past him out the door. The video was about to end, but the adventure has just begun. Don't go away. Subscribe to our channel, and next time we'll fly even higher.